Hello, we're back. I'm going to start from the top. We had a brief suspension there. Welcome, a warm welcome to the Happy Festival. The home of the Happy Festival is Bury in Lancashire, inspired by and in celebrating the town's most famous daughter, the one and only Victoria Wood. My name is Jasper Rees, and I'm the author of Let's Do It, the Authorised Biography, which has recently been published by Trapeze Books. As we all know, Victoria was a very great sketch writer, a brilliant stand-up comedian, actor, director and dramatist, but in the beginning she was a songwriter, and it's that element of her genius that we're going to be discussing today. In my three guests, we see assembled before us a trio of musicians who know everything there is to know about Victoria as a composer, a singer and a songwriter. They are Jim Parker. Now, Jim has won 4 BAFTAs for his television soundtracks. You'll know his work if you've ever watched Midsummer Murders, Foyle's War, or the original House of Cards, but he's here to talk about arranging the songs for Talent, Nearly a Happy Ending, Happy Since I Met You, and Wood and Walters. Hello, Jim. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Great to see you. And then we've got David Firman, who has conducted the original West End productions of, among others, Jesus Christ Superstar, Evita, Cats, Chicago, Phantom of the Opera, but along the way was Victoria's music director on Good Fun in the Theatre in 1980, and then he arranged the music for almost all of her television work, from As Seen on TV through all the way through to All the Trimmings. David, hello.
Oh hello.
Please identify yourself. Good to see you.
That's
and
you.
Finally, Nigel Lilley has been the music director on Bend It Like Beckham, Caroline or Change, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, La Cage aux Folles, and the National Theatre's award-winning and wonderful production of Stephen Sondheim's Follies. He was also Victoria's music director on Acorn Antiques, the musical, when it went out on tour in 2006. And he continued to work with her on the revival of Talent in 2009, the Midlife Christmas TV special, and 3 versions of That Day We Sang. Hello, Nigel.
Hi, Jasper.
Great to see you. Now, there's no getting away from the fact that we are an all-male panel. I need to address that, obviously, a manel, and maybe we can explore why that is throughout the discussion. But I want to start really with Jim and John Betjeman and Banana Blush. Jim, could you tell us how it was that Victoria and you came together?
Yeah. I was working with a group called the Barrow Poets, and as we did several years together, touring America, that sort of thing. And one of the contacts that we had was John Betjeman, and we'd made a few records ourselves. They never made any money, and they sold about 6 copies. You know, there were 6 of us, so that was it. That was probably the entire sales output. But one of our producers, who was called Hugh Murphy, he wanted to make a record with Betjeman, and one of our group was very friendly with Betjeman. So he said, "Well, okay, I'll get you Betjeman as long as Jim can do the music." So that really is how it happened, and that was how I met him actually. We got him along to the place where we used to rehearse, and I'd set a few of his songs to a harmonium and a violin and a person speaking the poems. And I think this rather tickled him, because he wasn't terribly keen on the idea at the start. What he said was, I thought poetry was its own music. But anyway, we persuaded him, and I think what really got him was the harmonium I was playing. It was one of those little things they used to play at the seaside, you know, a little sort of wooden box thing. And they used to do seaside sort of services. And this is what they used. They used to carry this box on and play a few hymns. So this tickled him. So he was on for the job. And eventually we made this record, and it was for some reason, which I've never quite understood, but it was for some reason an instant success. It got rave reviews in all sorts of papers. It was in the Sunday Times top best albums, along with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and all the rest of them. Rather to my surprise and slightly to his horror, because he'd been made he was the poet laureate, and he was very proud of being the poet laureate, because one of his great heroes was Tennyson, and Tennyson had also been the poet laureate, so he was thrilled to bits. And then when he made this poetry record, it suddenly became a pop record, and he was rather horrified, because he thought the royal family wouldn't be very keen on this. But anyway, I think they were quite keen. And
well, another person who was very keen on the record, which came out in 1974 to give it a coordinate. Another person who was very keen on it was Victoria. She was so keen on it that, and it had such a kind of an influence on her, that when I was writing the biography, there were two people who were insistent that it was them who introduced her to Banana Blush. So it was via, one was her university friend Fidelis Morgan, and the other was the stand-up comedian John Dowie. And they both said it was I who introduced Victoria to Banana Blush. And it was via Banana Blush that she came across your music. So when she had written the stage play of Talent, which was premiered at the end of 1978 in Sheffield, at the Sheffield Crucible in the Studio Theatre, then Granada decided that they wanted to do a television version of it, and clearly the songs needed to be adapted. And she said, "I want Jim Parker." So, do you have a recollection of that, of your first encounter with Victoria, and what she might have said about Banana Blush? Because clearly the orchestration she really loved.
I don't think we actually talked about Banana Blush, as far as I can remember. She probably came to my house, but I can't read it. It was a long time ago, 1974. If anyone's good at maths, they can work that one out. So I can't remember all these details, but she came along. We talked about the songs, and she seemed very nice, which she was. I think she probably played the songs. I can't remember whether she wrote them down or whether she stuck them on tape, because we used to have cassette recorders in those days. I can't remember how it came about, but anyway, she gave me the songs, and she never interfered ever with any ideas I had about the orchestrations. We didn't have the same instruments as Banana Blush, because it was a totally different project. Banana Blush was spoken to music, and of course hers was songs.
But there were some beautiful songs in that show. The one that everyone remembers, and she carried on singing throughout in her live show, was 14 Again.
Oh yes,
sung by Julie Walters in the show. It's just such a wonderful song.
It's a very good song.
What had happened with Victoria when she wrote Talent? Although when she started out as a songwriter, she wrote quite personal songs, and quite often sort of slice of life songs about women having disappointments in love. And then she got on to That's Life and Start the Week, and she was commissioned a lot to write these topical songs, which really had a very, very short shelf life. And then when she did this show at the Bush called In at the Death, she was able to write songs that she wanted to write. And one was a very beautiful song that she carried on performing in her live show for a long time, called Love Song, which was about a man whose wife has just died in hospital.
I think Love Song is her best song, personally. It's my favourite. And in fact, when we were doing Wooden Walters, I wanted to have it in the show, but I was voted out. But I thought it would have been a very good thing to have in the show as a counterbalance to all the humour. It's a very good song.
Why was it? Why was it counted out? And I wish you told me that when I was doing the biography.
In the next book, you can put that. I think they thought it was too gloomy, because it is a man whose wife has died, But it isn't. It hasn't got any cynicism in it, because a lot of Vic's songs, let's be quite honest, are quite cynical. She's of that school. In fact, I'd like to talk about that at some stage. what particular school of songwriting she is in. But this is a straightforward song about a man whose wife's just died, and he goes to collect her things and her wedding ring and her teeth, that sort of thing, Very good song.
Yeah, and that it's the first couplet is, "I made your breakfast this morning." I actually can't remember it exactly, but the point is, she makes the breakfast. He makes the breakfast for his wife, and then he realizes that she's died.
Yes,
So he throws the breakfast.
I know. Then I threw it away. He says. She says,
I threw it away.
Yeah, that's right.
David,
Yeah.
could I ask whether Jim said, "I never had any interference from Victoria about my choice of orchestration"? Was that your experience when you first met Victoria on Good Fun, which was her next play in 1980 at Sheffield Crucible?
Yes, it was. Apart from the very first time, the reason our paths crossed, I was actually at the Crucible doing Cabaret in the main house, directed by Peter James, with a set by Roger Glossop, and starring Gemma Jones. And Peter said, "There's this writer, Victoria, and David Leland is going to. We've asked her to write a show called Good Fun. David Leland is going to direct, and go and meet her and see what you think about the songs she's written." So I hightailed off to Morecambe, and they had a flat on the first floor, as I remember. And what I do remember was they had a paraffin heater. And most of you will be far too young to remember paraffin heaters. They had a sort of black stove in the, that sat on top of a tank of paraffin, and this black stovepipe was going up, and there was a little perspex screen where you could have a look at the wick. And if the wick was blue, you were going to be living. But if it turned orange, soot was going to come out, and shortly afterwards you would die. And she played me the songs, and I took as Jim said, I took a cassette along. Nobody remembers cassettes either. And then I took them down. She didn't write any of those tunes, and in my experience, at the time I worked with her, there just wasn't time for her to write the music down on paper or whatever. I just took it down from the tapes I'd made. And I drove back, and in my wisdom, I thought, well, now these are lovely songs, but they're not quite theatrical enough. So I'll maybe give them a goose here and there, adjust them a bit, and perhaps introduce them to the odd modulation and transposition and blah, 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 all of these really fancy things. And so I worked on that for about a week. And then I think I made a tape of me doing it and sent it back to her. And the answer came back in the negative quite quickly. And she said no, but she was very sweet. She said, "No, I think I prefer them the way I wrote them." Actually, I mean, at the time, we were both young and fancy free. I thought, okay. But she was entirely right. But that was actually in the time, well, over the 20 years that we worked together, that was the only time when she, if you like, said, well, no, I don't quite fancy that. To be honest, she didn't have much of a chance of saying that for Good Fun and then for the TV series, because at that stage, and Jim and Nigel will both know, this thing called Sibelius or Finale, these computerized music notation systems didn't actually exist, and nor did home studios. So you could talk about what you were going to do, what sort of instruments you were going to use, but you couldn't actually demonstrate. So the first time Vic would hear what it was going to sound like was when it was sounding like it. There wasn't an opportunity to say, actually, I don't fancy that bassoon. Well, now I hear it, oh dear, it's too late. And she, she stuck with me, so she must have been reasonably happy. I hope, or she couldn't think of anybody else. When we did, by the time we did Dinner Ladies, computerized notation had turned up. So she said, could I do a demo, which was absolutely fine. And I did a demo, and I think I played it to you, Nigel. And she came back and says, it's a bit feng shui, isn't it? It was actually. I put all sorts of ding dongs clatter-clatters and ping-pongs and stuff, which I thought was nicely, you know, working people busy doing things. And she wasn't that impressed. but to be honest, I mean, all joking aside, she was incredibly supportive to me, and I've no doubt Nigel and Jim. She adored music. It moved her. You can tell that in the way she writes. This is not somebody who constructs music. This is somebody who feels music. And she was. I know that people have said, and her repertory company said, goodness, sometimes she was very difficult, not difficult, but demanding in insisting that we got the phrasings right or whatever she'd written. With I believe, us musicians, she was just lovely to be with. That's my feeling anyway.
Yeah, no problems at all like that. She was very amenable actually, and she liked all music. I think, you know, I think she liked classical music. I think she'd probably been a classically trained as a pianist, I imagine, because she was quite good. She liked all music.
Yeah, I mean, you might know, but isn't it? I thought she played in a brass band, didn't she? She played the cornet in a brass band.
She used to play the trumpet, and when her son played the trumpet, she used to join in with him. In fact, I sent them some music that had got published for them both to play. I don't know whether they did.
Right.
She rediscovered the trumpet actually, David, when you were doing the Black Dyke Band episode in Dinner Ladies, and she became a great friend of the music director of the Black Dyke Band, who taught her at the Royal Academy of Music, Jim Watson. And Nigel, you eventually worked with Jim and Victoria when you were doing the Giddy Kipper, didn't you?
Yeah, so we arranged, well, Vic wrote the tunes for it, obviously, but we also did Leroy Anderson, Forgotten Dreams. And so I arranged it for Jim on flugel and me on piano. I mean, he was an astonishing player, a really beautiful sound. And also Vic whistled in that. So the lineup was me on piano, Jim, and Vic whistling. And actually, the whistling took longer than everything else put together because we giggled the whole way through. So, and you can't whistle if you're laughing. So we wasted quite a lot of studio time on that. But yeah,
Vic was a virtuoso whistling. On TV, we did a pastiche of sort of the Andrews Sisters or Fraser Hayes 4. It was called Knock Knock. We've got a knock 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 on your door, and we have three fabulous session singers who took to it like a duck to water. But the middle was a chorus, and no one could whistle, and Vic came forward and said, "This is me." So what you hear,
and she whistled all the time, like it was constant.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed that. No, I'll just say it again.
She whistled all the time through life. It was sort of, you could always tell when she was around.
Yeah.
You know, I never heard her whistle at all.
Really?
No, never on any occasion.
Well, I mean, when Vic developed, you know, I mean, right at the start of that, in the talent year, you know, in the talent years of Wood and Walters, that was so. She was so young, or not necessarily so young, but it was so early, and it was such. I mean, well, you know, Jim, that she was very shy. Well, was she shy with you, Jim?
No, she wasn't really shy. I've heard that she was very shy, but certainly in personal contact. I mean, I spent a lot of my time with her and Julie Walters. And they were the terrible twins. I mean, they were, you know, they weren't actually uncontrollable, but they were a bit unpredictable, shall we say? And it was great fun. But no, she didn't seem shy in that. In personal things, she seemed all right, actually.
Right.
Incidentally, Jim. We mentioned Jim Watson. He was a good old Northerner, like Vic. And in fact, I used him like you did to do ground force with the Black Dyke Band. he keeps cropping up in this story.
Yeah. Jasper, sorry, you wanted to say something.
Well, I don't want to stray too far away from the subject of Victoria's songwriting. Fascinating though the whole of her life is.
Right.
and her music making. Nigel, could I just ask you about your first experience of meeting Victoria on Acorn Antiques, the musical?
Yeah, it was my first job as an MD, and it was Vic's first gig directing theatre. And so I was a bit nervous, and we had Sammy Murray, who was Stephen Mears' associate in town, but then she sort of choreographed the tour. So I think all three of us were quite nervous and sort of, sort of edging around each other. And our first meeting was in auditions with the actors, and Vic. I'm not sure whether Vic always knew the effect she had on people coming into audition. Imagine, a lot of these people, she's one of their ultimate idols, and so they come in with their sheet music and people and Vic. I don't know. Well, as we've mentioned, but she didn't always sort of have a sort of amazing bedside manner. Maybe she'd be quite shy and wouldn't necessarily make people feel, as at ease. And so. Yeah, it was quite. I found myself then overcompensating, sort of being a sort of weird court jester, trying to keep everything ticking over. And then gradually, my main experience musically was that. And I think we talked about this when we talked about the book, Jasper. But for me, it was always about tempo, and I think a lot of that was a slight insecurity about her writing sometimes, about the music writing, and wanting things to always be quite fast. And trying to encourage her that the songs were great and they could calm down and settle, and not everything had to kind of race. I remember the first run in the rehearsal room. I was mortified. I was playing away, and Vic, I think the producers were there and some friends, and Vic ran over to the piano halfway through and said, "Why is everything so slow?" And it wasn't any slower than we'd been doing in rehearsal, but I think just the pressure of those sort of those extra eyes, and so a lot of it was really trying to get Vic to believe the material was really excellent, and that it didn't need to keep racing, and then that sort of conversation kept on happening through the tour, and I remember for the first few weeks I'd get a lot of tempo notes, and then by the time we got to about Birmingham and it was a huge hit and she came to watch it, and I remember her saying afterwards, "Tempo's all great," and I thought, okay, now we can, and from then on actually we rarely ever spoke about tempo, but that was a big thing for her. I think where she didn't get involved in orchestration per se, rhythms and tempi were really her thing. And if the show was ever a minute longer, I'd often get a text saying, what was that about? And which must be a hangover from TV days, where everything's so to time. And I just they laughed lots last night. The standing ovation went on longer. But rhythm and timings were the big thing.
If we could go back right to the beginning. Now, Victoria was, as has been alluded to, she was a trumpeter in a Berry marching band, and she did piano all the way up to grade 8. I never quite established whether she took grade 8, but she was clearly a very good, an extremely competent pianist by the time she left school. And she was a very good sight reader when she went along to the Rochdale Theatre Youth Workshop. She liked playing Grieg and giving it a bit of a jazz vibe, and things like that. So she was clearly very comfortable at the keyboard. But she then, when she went to Birmingham University, she started to develop her skill as a songwriter. And as the 1970s progressed, and by the time she encountered you, Jim, she had become a songwriter for whom the lyrics and the music were completely indivisible. When she did, and she clearly had a vast range of styles that she was comfortable writing in. She did a George Formby pastiche when she was on That's Life, and she also put in a little bit of Haydn in one of her That's Life songs, or a kind of Haydn pastiche. So she could range about. But so this is a preamble to my asking all of you individually, how good a composer was she? And that I imagine that question will involve discussing the way in which she liked to pastiche and parody, particularly in Acorn Antiques, different styles of music. I don't know who wants to go first. Maybe David, because you had in As Seen on TV, she produced a kind of blistering array of songs in different styles, didn't she?
Yeah, and yes, she did. And I was really fortunate, maybe unlike Jim in his situation, in that I simply had a budget for musicians for the entire series. So I can afford, you can have, I don't know, whatever it is, a certain number of musicians to be split around during the series, and they can be any combination you like, provided we don't go over top that. So that meant that she wrote, as you know, a sort of pastiche of Peter Skell and You're a Lady called I'm Just a Northern Boy, and I had a brass band and a heavenly choir. She wrote an absolutely gorgeous tune called Crush, where she is singing as an 11-year-old, looking across the bus to a 15-year-old on whom she has a 15-year-old boy on whom she has a crush. Just childlike and terribly winning and terribly affecting. And for that, she just played the piano as a demonstration. And I went sort of to town in a different way, and I wrote for a double string quartet, a harp, a 12-string guitar, a fretless bass, and a recorder. And then there were things like Go Away, where I tried to be, I don't know, a bit like the Eagles and sort of jazz funk, this Los Angeles loping beat. And then, if you like, with Barry and Freda, a trad jazz band, it's sort of trad jazz band. And so I got the opportunity to do all those, and she would just, when she played the original, the original song, she'd say what vaguely was in her mind, and then just let me run with that.
How about you, Jim? What was your sense of her as a composer?
Well, I found her very interesting as a songwriter because she did a lot of pastiche, but in actual fact, it always sounded like her, which I thought was very impressive. And I think she's not of the school of, say, Gershwin or Irving Berlin, Paul McCartney. It's a different school altogether, really. She's much more of the school, I think, of. Do you remember Tom Lehrer? Anybody here remember Tom Lehrer? Some people don't these days. He was a very brilliant songwriter, and he was a satirist, and his stuff was very, very edgy, much more edgy than Vic's actually. But I think she's in that school of writing, and my feeling is that she would have. Well, for instance, the Gershwins, George wrote the tune, Ira came along and put lyrics. I suspect it might have been slightly the other way around with Vic, although she obviously did both, and they'd work in conjunction. I suspect, I might be wrong about this, but I suspect the words drove the music. Does that make any sense?
Nigel, what's your feeling about that as the one who worked with her most recently as a songwriter?
Well, I never really worked out what came first, words or music. And I'd email and say, what are you up to? And she said, I'm staring at the bins, which was code for I'm writing. And then a couple of weeks would go by, and then I'd get that she said, okay, come over, got some stuff to show you. So, and by the time I got there, things were fairly complete. She'd take great pride in writing a top line. So I'd record it anyway, obviously. But she'd written a top line out, and so it was a bit of a. By the time I got there, it was the show and tell. So I never really got to the bottom of how it worked. You know what I mean? Whether it was the words or the music first. I suspect it was kind of done in tandem with each other. And everything done, I'm sure that Jim and David experienced this, everything done in strangely high keys for the demos. So a lot of the demos I have were in really very high keys, and often, again, with lots of whistling. So I've got a lot of the demos still, which pop every now and then. My iTunes is flicking through, and I hear some very high-pitched singing or whistling. And I know that's a Vic demo.
But no, isn't that part of this whole thing of she wanted everything to go faster? And I think that's to do with nerves or whatever, or anxiety, shall we say, or vulnerability, maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Let's sing high notes. It's a sort of. I mean, Jim, I sort of half agree with you about Tom Lehrer, but whereas Tom Lehrer is a fine, really clever writer. I think that Vic has more heart to her. I think that if, for example, that Peter Scullen tune, where yes, she is mocking it, or she's sending up, You're a Lady and that brass band tradition, she's also celebrating it. And if you watch that, if you watch the clip, sat at the piano and the brass band are behind her, towards the end of the song, she closes her eyes because she's just transported by the noise of a brass band. I mean, this isn't somebody who's putting it down and sending it up and saying, look at me, I'm so clever. She's saying, isn't this wonderful music?
Yes. Yeah. No, I think there was compassion there, and there certainly isn't compassion in Tobinera. Maybe Sondheim is a better direction.
Or Randy Newman. I think Randy Newman's.
Or Randy Newman, yeah.
She was such a big fan of his.
Yeah.
She was introduced to Randy Newman in the middle of the 1970s when she was in a show in Edinburgh Festival. Andy Roberts, who was one of the group's Grimm's, introduced her to Randy Newman and said, I think you ought to write songs a bit more like this. And because he didn't like her comic songs. He wanted her to be more sort of, Randy Newman-esque. And it's notable that when she was on Desert Island Discs the second time, she chose a Randy Newman song.
Yeah.
I want to take. Sorry to interrupt, Jim. I'm going to take a risk now. We were. If I can just reveal the Swan's Legs paddling, we were thrown off YouTube because we played the Ballad of Barry and Freda in its entirety, and we got a black mark against us. So we've got a couple of other clips that we want to show from YouTube, but we're not going to show the whole of them because we're worried that we might be thrown off again. But we do want to throw just show a short clip from Wooden Walters, which is a song. We might not even get to the song before we decide to cut out, but there's a lovely little moment where Jim Parker is introduced by Julie and Victoria. So Jim, I don't know if you want to say anything about this before we show it in truncated form.
No comment.
Okay, all right. Well, let's play the clip then.
I am Victoria Wood. This is Hooley Walters.
Good evening.
Now, the original title for the show was Two Creatures Great and Small.
Oh, Wood is thicker than Walters.
Oh, thank you.
This is our orchestra, or to give them their correct technical title, the Lads. They were assembled in the usual fashion, with me hanging out of an upstairs window in Soho in a half-cut bra with a megaphone.
Now we have Harry on drums, Bill on guitar, Albert on the radiator because we're short of chairs.
And our musical director, Mr. Jim Parker, on antidepressants.
Yes.
The band will be starting with Rock Around the Clock, but due to the overtime ban, they'll be stopping at 10 to 11.
And Saturday Stell will be stopping at home.
Yeah, but that's not because of economy, that's because we didn't want it. Oh, shh, they can't hear. It's in Gay Paris. But just in case, Sasha. Ooh la la, coup d'etat and broderie anglaise.
Yeah, right. Now, then, I'm doing my song now.
Yes, right.
Okay.
Right. Yes,
right.
You.
Hang on.
So that was Jim Parker on antidepressants. Great gag.
Not true.
Glad to hear it, Jim.
Rubbish.
Wasn't very happy with Wooden Walters in the end. She's, as Jeffrey Durham, her husband, told me, she wanted it to be Morecambe and Wise, and it never turned out to be. And Peter Eckersley, her beloved producer at Granada, who was the person who commissioned the TV version of Talent and then Nearly a Happy Ending, and actually my favourite, Happy Since I Met You, as well as the whole series of Wooden Walters. He died just before the series of Wooden Walters was being made. So it became a fraught process for her doing that. A lot of the songs, most of the songs were written for, not for Wooden Walters, but songs that came from, for example, Good Fun that she'd already done with David, or songs that she'd been playing on stage. Do you have a memory of how those songs were generally put together, Jim, on Wooden Walters?
I don't really.
It's 40 years ago.
Well, it is. Yeah. Well, I make it 36 actually. I'm like, no, 46 isn't. Anyway, I don't really. I remember it wasn't. I didn't feel it was my best moment, to be quite honest. I wasn't very happy in Wood and Walters either, really, because I felt I wasn't doing a terribly good job. It was a job much more for Nigel or David, really, mainly because I had to play the piano. So I wasn't all that happy, really. It wasn't that happy a show, really, and certainly Peter's death was a bit of a shock to everybody, especially to Vic.
Yeah. When it came to David, when it came to As Seen on TV, that was clearly the beginning of a beautiful relationship between you and Victoria, which lasted all the way to all the trimmings. And I know you did other bits and pieces of work with her after that. But how did, I think you suggested to me that she didn't, well, actually, could you just say how As Seen on TV came to you, and then also talk about the theme tune, which is such one of the great iconic theme tunes.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay. So after I'd done Good Fun, and we did 2 seasons of Good Fun at the Crucible, I came down to London and I was getting on with whatever I was getting on with. And on a Sunday afternoon, Jeff Posner, who was the producer of As Seen on TV, who I didn't know at all, I just got a call out of nowhere. And the man introduced himself as Jeff Posner and said, I'm doing a series with Victoria Wood. Do you know Victoria Wood? And I said, yes, I do. Yeah. And he said, well, would you like to be the music director and do the arrangements? And I danced a jig, you know. And I thought, my boat is, my ship has come in. And so when I saw Vic, I said, did you suggest me to Jeff? She said, oh, no. He must have found it some other way. And I thought, that's strange. But I took her at her word. How credulous am I? And it was only about 10 years later, I thought, of course she flipping did. And I never really thanked her properly, which I certainly should have done. And so we had a long series, you know, over several series, and everything went from that. And many people say, Jasper, you made a really terrific comment, which has stuck with me. When you were talking about Vic, you said that many people thought, many of her audience thought they knew Vic very well. If you had 5,000 people in the audience at the Abbott Hall, oh, they know Vic. That's not quite right, as you say. It's she who knows them. They don't know her really at all. And even though I worked with Vic for a couple of decades or more, and we kept in touch well after that, and I know Grace and Henry, her son and daughter, or daughter and son rather. Vic was not a difficult person. She held a lot in reserve, and that was both her charm and occasionally your anxiety. There was one occasion where I thought, oh, I need to be very careful. And that was when we were doing Barry and Freda, but I'll tell you about that later. But anyway, does that answer your question, Jasper?
Tell us, yes, but tell us about the theme tune, which is, such a beloved.
Okay, so I think she whistled it actually. She was going cha. I went, I can't whistle it. Whistling, you know. And I'm doing my, I'm thinking acting. And I thought it was a terrific tune. And I thought what we need is a gallon of clarinets all tootling away. And then because I thought it was Vic's flavour and I thought the tune was his flavour, I also had a euphonium and a violin doing the middle eight. So you had these clarinets going and then with the euphonium. Jolly Jape, and I thought, oh, that'll be fun. And there was a banjo in there and what's that? And I thought, what's a nice bright key? This is a sick tune. There's no vocal at all. I can write it in any key you can think of. And I thought, oh, a bright key is A major. So I wrote it as an A major, and we recorded it Grove. And Jim and Nigel both know, and for sort of people who aren't quite conversant with the clarinet, the clarinet plays in B flat, which means that when you play B flat on a clarinet, they think it's C. Now, don't ask why, but they do. So they please play a clarinet player. He'll play B flat. Now, C to C, D, E, F, G. Those are all the white notes on the piano. They're dead easy to play, and it's that's how you learn chopsticks. But if you move one down to A major, that means that the clarinet is playing every single note in a very, very strange place where you spend the entire time wriggling, trying to finger it. It's like playing all the black notes, and it's just agony. And so I went 1, 2, 3, 4, and a terrible collapse. I should say the euphonium also plays in B flat. So everybody was playing in a key that was absolutely hideous to them, that was a nightmare to them. And these are fabulous players, all going, oh, why did you write it in this key? And there was no reason. I should have known. Anyway, I didn't. So we got the break, and it would still been catastrophe. And then, really illustrious players like Roy Willicks, that Jim will remember, spent the entire break fingering those keys and putting pencil marks and stuff. But what it did do, and that's not, I don't claim any credit for it, was by the time we actually did record it, and all those wonderful musicians, I mean, it was squeaky bum time. Everybody was really up there. And so it's got this feeling of, we can only play this right once, so better play it all together now. So it's got a sort of edge of, or a patina of, go for it, lads, there's only one chance here.
You talk. Thank you, David. You talked about how there was a sort of unapproachability about Victoria, but that was in the last 10 years of her life. Victoria did become very close friends with Nigel, and Nigel, I wonder if you could talk about how, because you went to the theatre a lot with Victoria, didn't you? Could you talk about her? How much she loved musical theatre?
Yeah, I mean, there was one. Yeah, we used to go to the theatre probably every couple of weeks. I mean, in the end, I'd just booked 3 tickets. It'd be me, Louise, my other half, and Vic, and it was just like, so we'd assume she'd come. I remember a good memory was I went up to stay with her in the lakes, at the house in the lakes, and it was just me and Vic. And I took the box set of That's Entertainment. It was a DVD set in the days of DVDs. And I think it's 3 DVDs plus a bonus DVD. And I'd taken a load of champagne up as well. Vic wasn't a big boozer, but I took some champagne up. And I remember, like, Sunday afternoon, we sat and we watched the first DVD of That's Entertainment, which is about sort of 2 hours of Ann Miller and, various. And we had a bottle of champagne, and then they were saying, should we watch another one? Should we watch the second one? I think we watched all 4, and I mean, quite squiffy by the end of it. But a real love for kind of old time MGM stuff, and then certainly a love of Sondheim, and yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if we were always the most generous of like audience members. She could be very critical. But equally, I remember we went to see Imelda and Gypsy, and she was, it was just the most brilliant evening, and same with Sweeney. So, she gave credit where credit was due. But yeah.
What were the musical influences, the musical theatre influences that went into both Acorn Antiques and That Day We Sang? I know that's a big question.
I mean, I probably feel more qualified to talk about That Day We Sang, because Acorn, I wasn't on the one in town, although obviously, I know it well. I mean, I think Acorn references a bit of everything, and I think That Day We Sang, she often talked about Acorn and said, was it a missed opportunity? Should she have just written something original? Like, was it a bad idea to have done something based on should she have been braver and not based on something pre-existing? Because those opportunities to get to do a big full-scale musical are quite rare. And then I think that day we sang was a kind of response to that, to do something, you know, with a completely original story, and albeit based on a true story. And I think in that, you know, something like Was That Me? That's very Sondheim me. You know, that's probably as Sondheim as we get in terms of the vocab. I think it's really sophisticated. And the finale, the way you know, we mixed in, or she mixed in, Nymphs and Shepherds with that tune.
I'd love to ask you and Jim, who both worked on Talent 30 years apart, how you found the music and the musical. Did it? I mean, for you, Nigel, did it feel like it was a work of the late 70s, or?
I guess in some, I mean, it is so retro anyway in terms of its story. I guess the structures of the songs kind of interested me. They, you know, some of them, they don't follow sort of traditional song structures, I'd say. We did add a couple of things. We added a new opening number, which was a kind of pastiche of this 70s band. And then she added an epilogue, which I think is really beautiful. One of her best things, actually. But yeah, it was fascinating. It was great. I'm sure some of the music that I worked off was yours, Jim's. I think some of the manuscript I had was probably your handwriting. So she had a big box in the corner of the office. So.
I'm looking at the clock and seeing that we at a certain point we're going to run out of time. So I do need to ask both David and Nigel about working on the Ballad of Barry and Freda. If you, I wonder if you could just bounce off each other and compare experiences of, because David, you did it you orchestrated it in 1985, or was it 1986 for the second series of As Seen on TV. And then when Midlife Christmas happened in 2009, Nigel, you worked on a new version of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it wasn't arranged by you, but
Could I ask David, do you remember hearing it for the first time?
Yes, I do. Absolutely, I do. Yeah. Yes. What I used to do was I used to trundle. I think I went down to Highgate, but Jasper will tell me I went somewhere else. Anyway, Vic introduced me to Barry, and she said, "This is quite a long song." She never used to say much about these songs. This is quite a long song, and I've done it a few times in small venues. And she sang it to me, and I had this lyric sheet, and I thought it was really funny, but I was also thinking, now there's a lot of that. What do I do to support this and refresh it and keep refreshing it and go towards, the climax? And I said, what do you have in mind? She said, well, sort of a jazz bandish sort of thing. So I came up with a lineup which had a clarinet and a trombone and a trumpet and banjo and whatever. And the thing was that we recorded it. We did it on a Sunday, which is when it was done. In fact, the whole show was done, or the bits that were going to be done, filmed in front of an audience, were put on that Sunday. And the setup for Barry and Freda was at the end of all the other sketches. So the audience had been there for quite some time. And for camera shoot and all sorts of things, and for boom mics and all the technical requirements, it meant the piano, where Vic was positioned, was quite away from us, our little combo at the back there. And I was on a tack piano, which is a piano with drawing pins in its heads, in the piano heads. So, and during rehearsal, we didn't have much time to rehearse. We had one band call and then doing it for camera script. And because of the gap, the distance between Vic and the rest of the band, and because there were drums, and she'd never worked with the combo before, she was obviously, as you said, she liked things to go fast. And she set up at breakneck tempo and got faster and faster. And, so we parted company. And it was a time, Jasper, when, and I don't think I ever said this to you, because I only really realised it in the last couple of days, I suddenly saw her face fall, and I could see the anxiety, and I thought, I've let her down. I'm getting in the way. What I've done is actually making her life very difficult, which is the opposite of what you're supposed to do and what I want to do. And I thought she might decide, oh, I'll do it without the band. Mm-hmm. But I said, should we have another go? And we sort of coalesced in a fairly fragile way. It wasn't great.
I had a parallel sort of experience with the same song though, which is that obviously we were doing it for midlife, and we had a big sort of Busby Berkeley thing in the middle, obviously. So we needed to click it because it needed to be on click track so we could line it up for all the shots. And so I'm trying to sort of steer a middle ground in terms of a tempo. I think is somewhere in the middle of where the demo were. And same experience. We did it in the studio, and it was flat as a pancake. And I realise now I was buying into sort of pre-existing trauma, but that we then had to adjust it, and we did every sort of verse and chorus. We notched it up, and suddenly it sat. But it was a bit hairy.
Both of you two described to me the audience reaction to when it was recorded. David, you talked about the audience just kind of collectively and unusually for a TV theatre, them leaping out of their seats. And then it was in 2009. It was recorded in the Bloomsbury Theatre, wasn't it, Nigel? And so it was a more theatrical setting. So they went nuts as well. Yeah. Jim, you had a very different experience recording songs for Wood and Walters because Victoria was not happy with the audiences for those midweek daytime recordings. She came home from one recording and said to Jeffrey that it was like a jigsaw club for the bereaved. That there were these ancient people who were sitting there in these audiences. Do you remember how those songs, like, I mean, the wonderful Northerners, for example, which had Julie and Victoria, taking the piss out of Northernness, and with a trio of blokes in cloth caps backing them up. Do you remember how that actually went down and how the other songs went down on Wood and Walters?
Yes, I think the songs, I think as far as I remember, the songs went down very well actually, but there were quite a lot of pauses where things weren't happening. So the audience had to sit there. We got to one stage where I thought we should have actually played a number just to keep things moving, but we didn't know when we were going to start again. So, but I think the audience reaction was good actually. There were presumably people who didn't have a job, I suppose, and had probably had retired. I think it was quite an old audience, as far as I can remember.
She dined out on the age of that audience in every interview.
Did she?
Ever since. Now the clock is ticking, so I have some people who've been watching have got various questions which I'm going to read out. I'm going to make this the quick fire round. First question is, Nigel, do you have a favourite song from Acorn Antiques or That Day We Sang?
Good question. Probably Was That Me, because it feels so much like Vic's voice. Okay,
but you and I, between us, and indeed David may know the answer to this, are there any unreleased songs which will be released now? There are a lot of demos knocking around, but as for songs...
I don't know of any songs that are... no, I don't know, because you lose track of these things. We're itinerant musicians. We do what we're told, and off we go trying to work elsewhere. Can't offer any more on that, I'm afraid.
Okay, Nigel, could you talk about putting together the beautiful song "Remind Him" in Acorn Antiques the musical, which the questioner asks is or suggests is surely one of Victoria's most moving, which I have to say I completely agree with.
Yeah. Well, so I didn't work on the one in town, but I do remember that when we did the Sitzprobe, the first orchestral and the rehearsal of the orchestra and the singers in Manchester, I remember Vic getting a bit upset when we rehearsed that number. I think it was very personal, and I think it's beautiful and really economical, like a lot of her stuff.
It was, I have to say, given that it was written not long after the end of her marriage, it was a bit of a kind of biographical goldmine.
So in the midst of all that chaos of Acorn Antiques, it kind of, it took you by surprise.
This is a question for me. Are there audio recordings for the full-length Lucky Bag shows featuring Paula Duval? Yes, if you go on YouTube and put in Victoria Wood, Lucky Bag, you can hear the whole of the album. Nigel was lucky enough to see Acorn Antiques in the West End. Any plans to bring it back? I know that Rhea Jones, who played Mrs. Overall in the tour, it would love to revive it. Did any thoughts?
Yeah, I think there has been talk, and I imagine we will, or someone will at some point.
Right. There's a question for me. You seem to have had access to a lot of rare material. That is undoubtedly true. Did you find any trace of the summer show? No, there is no trace of the summer show. The summer show was a sort of knockoff of New Faces, which Victoria joined the cast of in 1975. And she said that they got the scripts out of other people's dustbins. And, she did write some original songs for it, actually, but and those songs she went on to perform elsewhere. But no, there are no tapes that exist of it. David, could you talk a little bit, and you know, if you could keep it brief, to bringing the vast and sort of epic production of Anne Widdecombe to life in all the trimmings?
Yeah, we did it in bits. It was like a layer cake, you know. You put a bit on this and a bit on that and a bit on that, and because it was later on in the process, we could use things like Nigel said. We could use click tracks, and we had did we have some monks, and then we had those three that came around the piano. Then we had a boys' choir, and I'd auditioned some children, and then we had Jim Watson and this big grand, and then we had some strings that we brought in, and then we put on Vic and the final vocal. It all took place in Angel Studios in Islington over the course of a very long day, as I remember.
I think you're forgetting the four Robbins siblings, Kate and Ted, and their sisters.
And all that.
Yeah.
How could I forget them? I apologise.
Ted Robbins, who, Jim, you may remember as Victoria's original warm-up man on Wooden Walters, who to try and get the... Do you remember the story about how he tried to enliven the elderly audience?
No.
If not, oh well, he you know, there was a break of 20 minutes, and he was told to go out there and keep them entertained. He said, but I've run out of material. So he said his kind of rugby playing days kicked in, and he flashed his bum at them, which Victoria loved telling that story for the rest of her life. She was still telling it when she did Midlife Christmas in you know, nearly 30 years later.
I don't think we were on stage at that time, actually.
Right.
I don't remember his bomb.
Ted, who unveiled the statue of Victoria in Bury, when David's, I think it was your adaptations of some of Victoria's songs for brass were played by the Black Dyke Band.
Yes, it was Black Dyke or the other one. The local, you know, the big local brass band, and I wrote a version of Barry and Freda and a version of Dinner Ladies, which they could play, you know, which they did play during the unveiling of the statue. Yeah,
it's very beautifully done. Nigel, do you know if Victoria had any interest in writing more musicals?
Yes, she did. Yeah, for sure. I don't know. We didn't speak specifically about it. I mean, to be honest, the last time I saw Vic, she said, I want to get back in a rehearsal room. Yeah, I think that was one. I mean, she was at her happiest, I think, in a rehearsal room.
I never found any evidence of anything.
I don't think anything was specifically planned. I just know that the will and the intention was there for sure.
She did talk to Daniel Evans, who was then the artistic director of Sheffield Crucible or Sheffield Theatres, about maybe doing a musical with him. Yeah. But again, that conversation came to nothing. I've got a question here. Who came up with the continuity announcer idea and wrote the script? Was it purely Vic? Yes, it was. That's not about songwriting. So the answer to that is in Let's Do It, the authorised biography of Victoria Wood. To everyone, 3 words to describe Victoria. Sorry.
Oh, wow.
Jim?
Oh, God.
While you're thinking, it was the Brighouse and Rastrick Band, apparently.
Very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Right, I'll go first. Instinctive, observant, generous.
Who wants to go next?
So next, I'd say, I think, well, all of us are evidence she was loyal. So, you know, she stuck with people.
Yes.
So loyal, you have to say shy, and quite direct.
Yes.
Jim, do you have anything to add to those?
Yes, I do. I think really what I liked about her was her originality. She was a very original songwriter, actually.
Yeah.
I'm going with a complicated genius.
Yes. Very good. Very good.
I think we're pretty much out of time there, but we are going to close with a wonderful treat. Before I finish, I would like to thank Liam Richardson for doing our tech and for holding it together while we had that problem at the beginning, and Diana Hamilton of the Happy Festival for making this whole thing happen. Thank you also to the Victoria Wood Foundation for supporting the festival, and thanks to the Victoria Wood Estate for, if you're watching the live stream, what you're about to hear. Nigel, I wonder if I could actually ask you to tell us a bit about what we are about to hear.
Yeah, this is Enid from That Day We Sang, and it's a real sort of tour de force. I can't remember how long it is, but it's, I mean, it's a good sort of 4.5 to 5 minutes.
4 minutes, yeah.
And it's the story of Enid, and she's been burdened with this name that she doesn't particularly like, and she thinks it's quite boring. And so it starts with a long list of things that Enids can't do because their name is so uncool, and because Enid doesn't really rhyme with anything. And then there's a big sort of fantasy sequence and a dance break, obviously. And then at the end, it's a sort of triumphant call to arms as to what she's going to achieve in her life. And this demo is from when we did, I think, when we were doing the TV version, and Vic and I decided we needed to put some demos together. So.
And she had, I mean, clearly, because Victoria had long since given up performing by the time That Day We Sang came around in 2011, and then she revived it in Manchester, Royal Exchange, and then did the TV version. She wasn't performing, so she never played Enid. So no one has ever heard Victoria sing this song. It was sung by Jenna Russell on stage brilliantly, and then it was sung by Imelda Staunton
and Anna Francolini at the Exchange, I think.
So this is Victoria singing a song that none of us has ever, well, you and I have heard her sing it, but no one else. We should say that Nigel is playing the piano beautifully, and there's a fantastic piano break in the middle of it. So without further ado, thank you very much indeed to Jim Parker, David Firman, and Nigel Lilley. It's been wonderful hearing your memories of working with Victoria Wood, the songwriter. And here we have Enid. Take it away.